is a new adventure for me, but I'm excited to try this. And I'm going to give this my all, and I really hope to make a difference in the state of Utah. So I've got some prepared remarks here, and then at the end, you can ask me any questions that you'd like. So I'm going to go right ahead here. My name is Randy Hopkins, and I'm announcing my candidacy for Congress in Utah's 2nd Congressional District. Thank you. I'm a proud Democrat. I'm proud of the party that has always looked out for the middle class. The American dream has always been about upward mobility within the broad middle class. It is the middle class that defines our character as a nation and is the engine of our economic vitality, creating jobs and sustaining companies. Government policies ought to be geared towards sustaining the middle class and helping those who are not yet there have an opportunity to get there. That means access to the building blocks that form the foundation of the middle class, access to education, access to health care, and access to sustainable wages for families. But that's not what we're seeing out of Washington today. That isn't what we see from the Republican president and Republican Congress. What we see is a Congress that passes a tax cut that overwhelmingly helps the wealthy and adds $1.5 trillion to our national debt. That's when we already have a debt of over $20 trillion. What we see is an attempt after attempt to pass legislation that would cut off access to health care for 20 or 30 million Americans at a time when we should be expanding our health care coverage. A recently published study in the journal Health Affairs found that a child born in the United States has a 70% greater chance of dying before adulthood than kids born into other wealthy democracies. It's an incredible statistic, and of course the United States is the only major industrialized country in the world that does not provide some form of universal health care coverage. In the wealthiest nation on earth, I'm determined to work with other representatives to find a way to provide access to health care for everyone. If elected to Congress, I will fight for universal access, and I will fight to preserve Social Security and Medicare. Republican ideas have become stagnant, but it's not only that. Republican leaders have become strangers to the truth. The Republican Party has become a fractured caricature of itself. What can you say about a party that is so tribal, so dislocated from reality, that they support a candidate for Senate, Roy Moore, who believes that if you are a Muslim, you should not be able to serve in Congress? It's a very short ride on the bus from the anti-Muslim stop to the anti-Mormon stop, the anti-Jewish stop, the anti-Catholic stop, or the non-religious stop. In this country, we don't believe in a religious test in order to participate in our democracy. And yet the president and his party supported this guy. We don't believe in a religious test, and we don't believe in a race-based test for people to enjoy the full measure of America's freedoms. And yet here we are on the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. weekend, being subjected to a presidential onslaught of racist remarks. But where was the condemnation from Republican leaders? Where was the condemnation of our own Republican delegation? Oh, Mia Love, to her credit, was willing to call out the president's reprehensible remarks. But where were her colleagues? Strangely silent, and by their silence complicit. So quickly has the president diminished America's standing in the world. Republican candidates like to invoke Reagan as their modern-day leader, but this is not Ronald Reagan's party. President Reagan's vision was one of an inclusive big tent, a city set on a hill, hopeful and optimistic. Sadly, that party has been replaced by the alt-right, bigoted ideology that Senator John McCain said was a half-baked, spurious nationalism. And so the party of Reagan is no more. Sadly, most Republican leaders stood by in silence and let Reagan's party fade into memory while the party of Trump and Bannon took over. In George Orwell's book, 1984, it takes the character Winston Smith 40 years to give in to the institutional untruths of Big Brother. But now in the Trump era, it has taken Republican leaders just a few short months to capitulate. They now love Big Brother, accepting that black is white and white is black, pretending that real news is fake news and fake news is real news, refusing to speak when Trump accepts the word of Vladimir Putin over the word of our intelligence communities. The cult over common sense, the tribe over truth. The sad reality is that we have a president who does not tell the truth. He misstates, exaggerates, and propagates half-truths when he isn't telling outright factual lies. He continues to undermine the very institutions of democracy necessary for a free society to survive. And yet Republicans in Congress stand by and say nothing. In that respect, they have become complicit. It is not okay to stand by in silent acquiescence. Neither is it okay to fawn over this childlike leader like the lieutenants of a dictator fearing for their lives. Don't Republican congressional leaders understand that the legislative branch is a separate and equal branch of government? A branch that is meant to provide a check to presidential overreach. Feeding the ego of an autocratic-leaning leader is a dereliction of congressional responsibility. Pronouncing him as perhaps one of the greatest presidents of all time is downright inexplicable. This moment in history will be viewed as a giant step backwards for America. And those who are standing by silently giving their tacit approval to the spurious, conspiracy-laden, racially tinged nationalism of Trump will be judged by history no better than those who stood silently by when institutional racism thrived under the false premise of states' rights. It's time for a change, and change means telling the truth. The truth has become so easily discarded in our discourse that neither science nor common sense can penetrate many of the Republican base. But I'm going to speak the truth and let the chips fall where they may. Woo! When Republicans say we ought to shrink our national monuments, I'm going to say, no, we shouldn't. They are treasures to our state. When Republicans say coal is making a comeback, I'm going to say, no, it isn't. When Republicans say that climate change isn't real, I'm going to say, I believe in the science. And when they say, how can you be a good Mormon and be a Democrat? I'll say, how can you possibly stand with a party that encourages and supports candidates who believe that you should be barred from service in Congress because of your religious beliefs? How can you be a Mormon or a member of any religious denomination or civil society and stay silent about a president who lies daily, brags about his conquests over married women, admits to groping women, demeans war heroes, fights with Gold Star families, denigrates Hispanics, and even suggests that a person of Hispanic descent, an American citizen no less, is not qualified to be a fair and impartial judge, and maintains that there are good people inside the white supremacist movement? I can't explain why most members of the Republican Party have stayed silent. I have nothing against Chris Stewart. I respect him and I believe he's an honorable man. But his silence, like the silence of so many others, is deafening. Some Republicans in Congress say that they like Trump's agenda, so they're going to support him. But as Senator Jeff Flake so eloquently put it, if that's the Faustian bargain we have to make, I'm not willing to make it. No politician should make that bargain. And so it's time for a change. My wife Jan and I recently returned from an LDS mission where we served in inner city Detroit, a place where gun violence is rampant and where hopelessness abounds. I spent my entire career working for the Department of Workforce Services, helping those in the most need find jobs. The focus of our mission was the same, to help those on the fringes of society. Our obligation was more than just to help these good people find employment. Our responsibility was to also help them find hope and optimism and belief in themselves. A belief that they can achieve, that they can function in society, that they and their children can participate in the American dream. It has been said by many people that America is not only a place, but it's an idea. It is the greatest idea that has ever been established for the greatest chance for free people to thrive. I'm still a believer. I'm still hopeful about America. We just need to speak truth first. I don't have all the answers, and I don't pretend to have all the answers. But I'm willing to listen, and I'm willing to speak out against the destructive politics that have dominated our political discourse in these recent years. I'm the son of working-class parents. My dad was a laborer most of his life. Following his service in the Navy during World War II, he worked at the Union Pacific Railroad in Ogden. He ended his career working in a warehouse. It was honorable work. And he was always hopeful and optimistic about America and the promises it held. He didn't go to college, but his children and grandchildren did. This is the hope of America. This is the idea of America. Both political parties once held on to that hope, but now we have an embattled Republican Party with a pretender at its head, who represents values and ideals that are inconsistent with the future we envision for our children and grandchildren. My hope is that Democrats and Independents and Republicans will make a stand with me. Don't give up. Don't give in. A good first step would be to break the Republican monopoly in our congressional delegation so that alternative voices can be heard. If you are a Republican and you're tired of the slow drift into the absurd, if the direction of the party is no longer going to where you want to go, then please come and stand with me. We can stand together for truth and for principle. I have no illusions about the difficulty of this race. This is a heavily Republican district, but I think we live in a time when there are Republicans who are fed up with feckless leadership. Maybe some are willing to step outside their traditional orthodoxy. There is nothing sacred about a political party. It is not religion. You don't have to renounce your religious vows to vote a different way. You just simply mark a different box on the ballot. You mark a different box to demonstrate your unwillingness to be complicit in the denigration of our nation. You mark a different box to show that you are not willing to support policies that are not reflective of the times in which we live. My father was a lifelong Democrat, but when Reagan came along, he embraced the hope and optimism that was Reaganism. I guarantee you that if he were alive today, he would not embrace the dark dystopian republicanism of today. We are a free people, and we are free to reconsider our political affiliations. I'm 65 years old. I'm a recipient of Medicare and Social Security. This is not exactly the time most people start a political career. I'm content with my life. But I feel a need to get out of my comfort zone, to stand up and be counted, and to do the best I can to be a voice of reason in an age of unreason, to be a speaker of truth in an age of untruth. My eye is now on my grandchildren and the generations to come. I have a lifetime of experience to bring to this job. I would be honored to do my part for a few years and then step aside. We cannot go back to the past. We cannot support those who want to turn back the clock, especially now when more people have more rights, more freedoms, and more opportunities than at any time in the history of mankind. It is not a time to look back. It is a time to look forward. And I look forward to working with Republicans, Democrats, and Independents who still believe in the goodness and greatness of America. Thank you.